Hi, I'm Richard Ashworth. I'm here to talk to you about Hexagram 60, GA restriction. The idea being that I give you some idea of what it appears to be saying, at least what it's saying to me, and also what you might do with it if you throw it today, with information about what I think each changing line is saying. So if you've thrown a particular changing line, we give you a bit of an idea about that. Bitter and restrictive rules will lead to misfortune, but such times will pass. Wu Jing Yuan, the Book of Changes is Yijing. This is about rules, restraint, restriction, sometimes translated as justice, and I think that's quite wrong. Anyway, the structure is water, the second son, can, over lake, Dway, the third daughter. It is the abyss over lake. The abyss is the hole into which we might fall, in this case, full of water. It's balanced. There are 3 yin lines and 3 yang. There is correspondence between the various lines, but particularly focusing on the 5th line, which is the ruler, possibly the strongest line in the Book of Changes because it is central, correct, and inflexible. What is interesting is that the image, the ideograph, is of the nodes of the bamboo stem, and we'll talk about that in a minute. Its time is July. So if you're looking at this in terms of prediction, forecast, whatever, July probably was the time to focus on. Where it comes from, its nuclear is number 27, the corners of the mouth, mountain over thunder, which is about the value, probity, usefulness of what comes out of the mouth in terms of words, and also in terms of the restriction that goes, the nourishment that goes into it. So, GA hexagram 60 restriction. As with everything, extremes cannot persist. Extreme yin gives way to yang and vice versa. The nodes of the bamboo stem give rise to all sorts of methods of accounting, including for time. With measurement, perhaps, comes restriction. Justice is a very poor translation, implying as it does a process separate from human agency. Bottom line, there are no rules, no rights either, only agreements, conventions, and imposition. And I'm not insisting you agree with this, I'm insisting perhaps that you listen closely and consider whether that makes sense to you. So, what Shang Yang, the godfather of legalism, said in the Book of Shang Yang is that the law is an expression of love for the people. And this was a guy who believed that a culture was more successful, happier, better ordered, with more punishments than rewards. Not a position that sounds very 21st century. Restriction. Just as a lake can only hold so much water, so human beings can take only so much restriction. There are many types of restriction: forcibly imposed restriction, martial law if you like, restriction by consent, restriction that is based on a misunderstanding, willful restriction, and the species of restriction that might simply be termed conscience. Hexagram 60 GA covers all of these and more. As we examine each, we may, however, conclude that all are, in a sense, self-imposed. There are, as I say, no rules. It may then be that the converse is resistance. We get the rules and the rulers we choose, however much we may insist otherwise. Resistance is, in a sense, an internal process, and GA on one level a guide to which rules to accept and which not, and on another to the flexible and appropriate responses to the possibility that there are no rules. But notice the structure. Can, the body of water, sits on Dway the lake. The flood sits on the pool. The configuration does not speak of choice. The restriction referred to is applied from above. And the ideogram of the nodes, or knuckles, of a bamboo stem extends in Chinese thought to all sorts of measurement: time, space, and position, festival, and ritual. It is the name given to the 24 solar fortnights of the Chinese calendar. You know, there's startled insects, Gingjit, which is early in March. And these are fixed measures which are surely beyond our control. Now, perhaps we'll get perspective by considering the alternative. The trigrams, for instance, that make up hexagram 47, kun, exhaustion, are the other way up, that is lake over water, which implies that the overwhelm concerned is willful. In a sense, that hexagram suggests that too much choice is not healthy, something Shang Yang might have been on board for. Kun is the hexagram of WhatsApps at 9 p.m. and emails on a Saturday morning. not perhaps such a great life choice, and perhaps very much informing the big problems of the 21st century. Overwork, under reward, perhaps. Legalism, the brainchild of proto-fascist Qin official Shang Yang, rests on the belief that the more the penalties, the fewer the rewards, the happier and more stable a society. Indeed, Hexagram 60 appears more in keeping with this position than with Confucianism. Legalism set a high price on resisting constraint. If you broke the law, you were liable to lose the softer parts of your body. Among constraints we ourselves deal with, we might include the working week, just as an example, and what is known as the social contract, an invisible agreement that implies that we all consent to respect the rule of law as long as the state makes it safe and otherwise in our interests to do so. It's an agreement we make. We may not even know that we've made it, that we agree that if a government will provide law, roads and education and peace, that we will obey the rest of those laws. And that's up for examination. Behind this fiction are the opposing views that, left to our own devices, life will become, as Thomas Hobbes put it in the Leviathan, nasty, brutish and short. So we can't be trusted to rule ourselves. And the opposite position associated with John Locke, that the state itself ejected us all from an unrestricted and blissful Eden. So one is saying government came in and saved us from each other, and the other one is saying that we were doing all right without it in the first place. So is restriction inherently imposed from outside? The oldest and therefore I think most reliable text attaching to GA is the few words applied to the gua, the hexagram in its entirety, which you'll know by now if you've been following these meanderings, are those of King Wen, and by implication belonging to an early and reliable tradition. And all King Wen has to say is broadly that harsh restrictions cannot last. That's basically the entire text. Both history and King Wen's judgment suggest that Shang Yang was mistaken. Harsh restrictions cannot last. In Chinese history, they lead to revolution after revolution, and in other histories too. We get judgmental about brutal Chinese middle age behavior in the Middle Ages. We just have to look at the Wars of the Roses over here. The first change, the line that changes, the first line, if we change the first line, which will give you an indication of what, if you've thrown this hexagram, you're changing, the first line is changing, is an early or premature response is the first line. It takes us to darkness, hexagram number 29, can is called darkness. It's water over water, a flood, a tumult, overwhelm. This is no moment to move. You can't move in the dark. You can't move when you're bailing out water. Discretion is the better part of valor, and so on. Technically, the yang line is fixed and in the right place and therefore not central, i.e. no movement from here would represent the middle path. The middle path is not here. This is appropriate restraint. Stick with it. Best not to make decisions in darkness of whatever kind. Accept the situation for now. If we change the second line, we get water over thunder. That's ton, hexagram 3, often called difficulty at the beginning, which counsels preparation and the careful maintenance of resources. It's like, make sure your tools are kept dry, during the winter so you can use them again in the summer. The implication is that the wrong-headedness presented here derives from a failure to pay attention, failure to keep up, and so an opportunity is missed. The yang line is central but inflexible but not correctly placed. Now it is the holding back which is inappropriate, as opposed to the first line where holding back was the right thing to do. The third change, if we change the third line, we get water over heaven, which is shu, hexagram 5, often referred to as waiting or rain-stopped play. This is a failure of deferred gratification. This is those of us who cannot wait. Those of us who'd sooner, a pound now to 50 pounds in a year's time. So the protagonist cannot control their appetites and desires, and the outcome is ruin. Without some kind of set of rules, some kind of restriction, comes some kind of self-discipline, everything goes pear-shaped. Absent restraint, and there is chaos. Some restriction is necessary. The yin line is incorrect and flexible. So if you've thrown that, It's telling you to kind of rein yourself in, perhaps, to look at whether your behavior is favoring right now at the expense of later on. They might be smarter to behave differently. The fourth change is to lake over lake, Dway the joyous. And it suggests that keeping the rules leads to joy. As a Zen monk might say, that the discipline leads to freedom. This line is flexible and correct, not central, but it's in service to the very strong yang at the fifth line. It's obeying the rules put out by the ruler at the fifth line, and also bringing the feelings of the people, the ideas of the people, and sound advice, sound popular advice, to the strong ruler. Dway may represent the peaceful regulations in the text, rules voluntarily adopted which lead to peace and stability. This is rule by consent, a contract that suits all. Such rules may be introduced from outside but depend upon compliance. There are no rules. Fifth change is to Earth over Lake, Lin, hexagram 19, advancing, one of the tidal hexagrams that appears once a year. And it rules the 8th month. So if you're looking at time here, we have July, which is perhaps the 7th month or the 6th month, depending on how you count it. And the action here is happening in the 8th month, if you want to look at it that way. This is as perfectly configured a ruling line as there is in the Yi, strong and supported by compliant advisors beneath and above, which makes for regulation that is reasonable and sweet. The ruler sets an example of self-discipline, which is echoed easily by the people. So rulers have to behave well in order for people to behave well. The society is a reflection of the way the rulers are. If the rulers have self-discipline, then society will tend to be that way as well, and it will tend to work, is what the message of that is. So it's suggesting that rulers need to behave themselves. If you are a ruler, if you are a boss of some sort, you've thrown this line, that may be what it's telling you. If you are dealing with a ruler or a boss, it's telling you that too, on whatever level, international, social, relationship-wise. Finally, if we change the 6th line, it becomes wind over lake, Zhongfu, hexagram 61, inner sincerity. And it is this quality that's dependent upon. Now, they say that the road to hell is paved with good intentions. I think it absolutely isn't. This line suggests it goes in no such direction. A law in itself is neither good nor bad, that its execution makes it so. So statute books are full of laws that were created in good faith and then abused by bad actors. So what's required here is good intentions in legislation, good intentions in making rules, good intentions in obeying rules. It's a reliance on good heart, if you like. A law in itself is neither good nor bad, but its execution makes it so. The 5th is, of course, the line of heaven and of communion with higher forces. Consulted with a due sincerity reference, they will prescribe when to indulge and when to hold back. Luke Reinhardt's The Dice Man, which I recommend to you, sets out to follow the instructions of the dice, which he throws to decide between 6 alternative courses of action. In fact, how the book begins is his woman that he's got a crush on, who lives in the flat opposite his in the apartment block, and he's summoning up the courage to knock on her door and ask her out for a drink or whatever. And he decides that he will let the dice decide, in the sense that he lays out 6 alternatives, throws the dice, and it says knock on her door, and everything changes from there. Over time, you're probably there already, he realizes that since it's he that is choosing the alternatives, and although the dice might arguably fall randomly, discuss, he is hence the one doing the choosing. And I'm reminded of the story of the guy who goes to a psychiatrist for analysis, which starts with a Rorschach test. So the psychiatrist puts an image in front of him and says, right, what does that make you think of? And the guy says, well, it makes me think of sex. And the psychiatrist says, puts another one in front of him. What does this make you think of? And the patient says, oh, sex again. And the psychiatrist goes, And then he puts another one, the third image in front of him. So what this time? And the patient says, sex, I'm afraid. And the psychiatrist said, well, this is obvious. You're obsessed with sex. And the patient says, who's putting these dirty pictures in front of me? So it may be a conceptual leap to suggest that whatever restraints we are respecting at any given time are our choices. But it remains, I suggest, the only one that fits the facts. So thanks for listening if you did. The other hexagrams we've looked at are on my YouTube page, so you can look at the kind of back numbers if you like. And these conversations come out of sessions I have with my students once a month. And you can join us for those if you like. We will ultimately get through all hexagrams, which will take about another 5 or 6 years. So thank you. I'm Richard Ashworth. I hope that we'll talk again soon. Thank you. Bye-bye.